for trial day 50. These are the events that led up to the sealing of the court. And she is here reporting. We fast forward until Judge Kelly gets on the bench. And of course, make sure that you are following Brandy Buckman on Twitter. Now, she posted this. She said, Roger is not with us. And I mentioned this earlier, but Roger Parloff, he said that I won't be live here today. Hopefully resuming next week. Roger's been with this trial from the very beginning. So prayers for Roger and his family. Now, Brandy says that all the parties finally arrive, including defendant Pizzola and attorney Metcalf. Away we go. Judge Kelly says, all right, everybody, it's good to see you back here in court today. All right, I've gotten everybody's emails over cross, and I've got to say that, having read all this material about the cross-examination of this upcoming witness, I think that all of it, maybe not all of it, but virtually all of it, I'm going to exclude, and let me explain why. So apparently, the government wanted to dive into this whole tangent during a cross-examination, and Judge Kelly says no. Wow. Judge Kelly says, well, I think Carmen Hernandez is right. Who is this? Who is this judge? Judge Kelly, is that you? Somebody tap him on the head. Says, I think Miss Hernandez is right. Wow. His testimony did not amount to a sort of character for nonviolence testimony that would, as we've discussed with other witnesses she would call, that would open the floodgate. Says, I went back, I looked at the testimony. She accomplished some things, but around the edges, I acknowledge all the way in which she asked about gathering in Vegas, and she sort of skirted the topic of violence. And she's referencing Carmen Hernandez, saying, okay, Carmen, she kind of was getting close to the talk about violence, but didn't get there, and so we're not allowing you to cross-examine him about violence. Says, I don't think that it's open season to show violence, okay? We're not going into all of it, especially when it's not connected to the core issues of the case. He says, and also on this doxing issue, he says there were times when the defendants expressed support for violence post-election in connection with the election results and their response to them. And that's one thing, but this is something totally different. And I just don't think the witness testimony opens the door to that. And so the prosecutor's like, they're ridiculous, Judge. Meanwhile, they've been winning every motion this entire time. We can't believe it. Carmen's like, holy crap, this is amazing. Wow. So Kelly says, okay, so there were some other issues that we were working through. One was regarding the Ministry of Self-Defense chat. He says, we all know what the forms say and what they don't say. I did look at this, and this witness said, I looked at the transcripts. He says, I don't remember joining, and apparently I've never posted there. And he was days away from leaving the club the entire time. And he says, so the government, they could play or they could talk about exhibits that sort of talk about this. Some particular exhibits have been excluded because they were free-floating odes to violence, but they didn't connect to J6 or to the tools theory that they are using. So Kelly is still going through the preliminaries. He says, and so also with regard to January 6th, he said the witness was already gone from the club by then. So I didn't see the basis to toll through things that were happening that day, and we don't need to go through all of it. So it's not beyond the scope, then it's relevance. And if it's not that, then it's 403. And so there's just a couple of chains. And so there's no reason getting into any of this. This is why he left. And Kelly continues. He says the next witness is going to be a character witness. And a character witness is coming in to talk about a defendant's character. He says if it's only a character for truthfulness, that's one thing. But a character witness for other character traits might open the door wide open on this. But I don't think this witness did. And the prosecutor's chiming in. He says, Your Honor, look, okay, yeah, all right, I understand. He says, I respect and I understand this ruling, but okay, understood. So there is no subject we should go into on cross with this witness because his testimony was generally non-relevant to this case. Prosecutor says, what I hand over to the defense is everything we have on this witness about violence and law enforcement. I don't get a proffer on on what this witness will testify to. Prosecutor sounds frustrated. The judge is saying that if he would have objected yesterday, he could have pursued that line of question that Kelly is now ruling out. Kelly says, I appreciate that. But again, it would be out on scope. It would be out on relevance. It would be out on 403. So you couldn't have got it in if you did something different yesterday. Prosecutor says, well, Judge, to the extent we hear any testimony on gatherings like the one Carmen Hernandez talked about yesterday, that portrays the Proud Boys as a non-violent club. Can we talk about that? Says Hernandez does the performance point very well, but she's very experienced and knows how to elicit what she wants to elicit in closing. And says, I respect her for that very much, but Your Honor, we're trying to counter that. So he's saying that Carmen got really close to the line. So let's pause for a minute here. There's a conversation about this prior witness and whether they can ask him about other violent activities. Carmen was asking him questions that was kind of getting close to being in or around events that might have led to violent activities. And he was talking about, we're a nonviolent club, but he was close to some of these violent things. And so Carmen said, well, I didn't ask him about any of those things, so I didn't open the door on cross-examination to allow the prosecutor to get into those topics. The prosecutor said, yeah, you did. You kind of did by getting close enough. The judge said, well, I thought about it. She didn't get that close. And so I'm not going to allow you to get into those other things. It's too unrelated. And the prosecutor is upset. He says, Judge, this is what Carmen does. She's very sneaky. She does this performance point very well. All right. She gets up there and she dances the line. She knows how to elicit what she wants. And then in closing, she's going to come and try to hammer it home. But I'm trying to counter that here, right? It's almost like he's accusing her of spreading misinformation or something. Kelly says, whatever she accomplished by saying the Proud Boys got together, I'm sure it accomplishes very much, putting aside relevance. So prosecutor's still complaining, Says, so I assume you'll sustain the objection if I ask about that video then? I don't want to go to the sidebar for the entire day. He's just pouting now. I'm happy to get up and thank the man for his testimony and sit down. He is pouting. Man, they don't like to lose a ruling. You see, this is why judges, they have a hard time ruling against the government because they act like whiny children. I assume you'll sustain the objection then if I ask about the video, he says. So let's just get that out of the way right now. And I don't want to go to a sidebar for the entire day. I mean, if you want me to ask him questions, Judge, I'm happy to get up and say thank you for your testimony and then sit back down. What a baby. So prosecutor says, but one thing I'd like to ask him about is the second degree initiation, what it takes to be third and fourth and what it takes to get into that. I suspect he'd say he'd have to get into a physical altercation to support the cause. Kelly says, okay, that's fine. I don't understand why he can't testify to that. And so they say, finally, all right, bring the jury in. Enough with the preliminary stuff. So we get back and the witness is back on the stand. It's Demetrius Robbins. And the prosecutor asks him questions. He says, okay, Demetrius, you testified about being present at a gathering in Las Vegas, trying to show violence. He says, yeah. And that had nothing to do with January 6th, right? Yeah. But you were present in Washington, D.C. on the 4th, weren't you? Yeah. It had nothing to do with January 6th. I was just there watching fireworks, but nothing to do with the 6th, yeah. Now, you were going to Zachary Reel's house for Christmas, didn't you? Yeah. And that had nothing to do with 1/6? He says, no. Do you remember the Ministry of Self-Defense chat form? He says, I remember the form, but I don't remember signing it. Do you remember being in the chat for MOSD? He says, that's what it's called? He says, you keep saying Ministry of Self-Defense. What do you mean by that? Now, the prosecutor's explaining that. And Robbins is being very curt, right? He's saying, hey, listen, prosecutor, you keep asking me about these stupid forms. I signed a form and entered the group. Yes. Yeah, I'm cutting you off. You keep saying Ministry of Self-Defense. That's what it's called. You don't have to keep reiterating it. And he's getting irritated because he doesn't like that he keeps bringing up the phrase. And this is what the prosecutor does, right? The prosecutor is going to say, it's kind of like what they do with the war in Ukraine. You know how they always say illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine before everything they say? Just to kind of keep saying it, right? Just to keep kind of programming you. Oh, yeah, that's why the illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine. And you start at, oh, is it really illegal? Is it really unprovoked? That's weird. They keep saying it. Is that true? I don't know. But the prosecutor knows if they keep saying it, it's going to say self-defense, 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 self-defense to the jurors. And it's going to make violence in their minds, just like what they're trying to do to us with this illegal and unprovoked crap. So he says, did you participate in these groups? And Robbins is upset. He says, "You keep repeating yourself. Stop with this crap." "So you left the MOSD before 1/6? He says, "Yeah, I did." "And you don't remember any communications in those Telegram groups, right?" He says, "For what? Messages? For what?" "In the lead up to January 6th. He says, "There was no January 6th. I don't understand what you're saying." "It happened when it happened," says Robbins. Prosecutor is frustrating. He says, "Look, I'm asking you about the message groups that you were in. Okay, there was messages between 1/6 and 1/1 and 1/6. Do you remember any communications with the Proud Boys preparing for 1/6? Defense attorney Pattis, objection, foundation. Judge says overruled. Carry on. So Robin says, "Repeat the question, man. What did you say?" McCullough says, "Do you remember any groups you were in from 1/1 to 1/6 where the Proud Boys were discussing the trial or the January 6th? Objection, sidebar. Sidebar's over. Prosecutor goes back, brings up an exhibit for Demetrius. It's a chat. Hernandez stands up. Objection, Your Honor. The chat's from December 27th. He's not even in the chat. Overruled. Hernandez keeps going. Judge, but I am objecting. He's not in the chat. Objection, overruled. Objection, overruled. Carmen, Hernandez, sit down. Prosecutor says, "Can you confirm you're not in this chat right here?" He says, "Yeah, my name's not there." So you don't know what was being said in the chat then. He says, "For what?" He says, "You keep saying Ministry of Self-Defense. I was in one of them. I don't know which names." He says, "Okay, listen, Demetrius, you have nothing to offer this jury about statements being made in the chat." He says, I don't know. Objection, overruled. "You have nothing to offer the jury in boots on the ground. You weren't in the boots on the ground chat." He says, "How can I offer anything that I wasn't involved in, prosecutor?" "But you did testify about what it takes to become a member of the Proud Boys, right?" "Yeah." "Good. Well, I want to show you this video. Looks like it's a Proud Boys video in Philly at American Legion Hall." He says, "Hey, Demetrius, it looks like some people are wearing a distinctive shirt, circling a pipe on the shirt." He says, "You see that?" He says, "Yeah, of course. I wrote it." He says, "Not everyone wears that shirt, though. Is that right?" "Not everyone. Not the newbies," says Robin. "So they need to achieve some status before they put that shirt on?" Robin's tone is dripping with disdain and impatience today at this prosecutor. He says they got to make a certain amount of meetings. Yeah. In the video, Zachary Real, who is a defendant in this case, is describing to the third-degree Proud Boy, you got to get a tattoo. "Is that true? You have to get a tattoo?" He says, "Yeah." When McCullough says you have to permanently ink the body, he says, "Yeah." Now, in order to become a fourth-degree Proud Boy, you have to take certain actions, don't you? "Yeah." "You have to engage in some sort of conflict on behalf of the club." He says, "We don't engage in conflict unless provoked." Good answer. Robbins can't answer about the fourth degree. He says, "Well, what about the fourth degree?" "I can't answer about that. I never made it that far. I left before I got there." Now, McCullough touches a nerve. He asks Robbins if he was in D.C. on 1/6. He says, were you in D.C. on January 6th? He says, "You like investigations, don't you? I see you digging for something you're not going to get." "No, I wasn't here." "You want police reports?" There's a bunch of crosstalks and objections, and Robin turns to the judge. And he says, the best I could hear, "You like overruled. I got you." Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I can't even take it. The judge just got told by Demetrius in court, "You like overruled. I got you." Okay, because the defense is objecting to protect Demetrius, and the judge is overruling the defense, which is making it harder on Demetrius. So he turns to the judge and he says, "Oh, okay, I see what's going on here. You like overruled. I got you. I see how this is going now. It all makes sense." He just told the judge. I would love to see this, man. Why can't we see the judge's face? McCullough says, you don't know what people were saying on the ground on 1-6, right? He says, I wasn't there. How the hell am I going to know now? More crosstalk. Robbins is fired up. He says, on January 6th, I was watching TV like everybody else. You got a problem with that? He says, your cousin, though, came. Isaiah Giddings, he came to D.C. on 1-6. Yeah. You were concerned about your cousin? Oh, yeah, of course I was. No further questions from the prosecutor. So Carmen Hernandez gets up, direct ends and begins rather quickly. One objections. She starts asking about other meetings. She says, the government asked why you left the Proud Boys. He says, because of my religious beliefs. Nothing further from me. Now, Brandy says, I also couldn't hear the full remark, but Robbins also made a brief wisecrack, half under his breath, about D.C. juries to Judge Kelly after the cross was getting a bit hectic. Oh my gosh. Oh man. Robbins made a wisecrack. Friggin' DC jurors too. What are they going to do? You know, and judge is like, I don't even want to know what the judge said. Now, he's done. No further questions from Carmen Hernandez. Shout out to Demetrius Robbins out there. You like overruled. I got you. Oh boy. Next witness is up on the stand. The defense brings out Carmen Hernandez, calls to the podium, to the stand, says, Your Honor, the defense calls Jonathan Nguyen, male, 41 years old, average height, married, newborn, and says, what were you doing when your child was born? Well, I was going to school, but I took some time off, says Jonah. I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. You know, I was studying business management. Nice. Congratulations on the newborn. Jonah says, do you know Zachary Real? He says, yeah, I love the guy. He's effusive on this, laughing and smiling. Yeah, he's great. He's a great dude. Love Zach. How long have you known Zach? He says, I've known him since 2009. And how did you meet? Through prior military service. Nguyen served in the U.S. Navy 2008 to 2016. Thank you for your service. He was a field combat medic, didn't go overseas. Now, Nguyen says Marines don't have their own medical unit, and so the Navy provides it for them. Says I was stationed in Yuma, shout out to Arizona, where I met Zach. Now, your job at the time, how was it that you met Real? Well, he says I was attached to a Marine Corps unit. Same base as Real, when Real was a Marine stationed out in Arizona, shout out. We've been friends ever since 2009. We still talk, and he came back over in 2020, back to my home state in Washington. So in 2020, Real, who came to visit you, and somebody else, who was it? Amanda, his wife. Well, tell me more about Zach. Well, he's a great person. You know, he'll give you the shirt off his back. He's always been there. I've always asked him for advice on the VA stuff. He's been very knowledgeable and smart. He says, is he an honest guy? He says, oh my gosh, yeah, I would trust him with my baby. It's a nice endorsement. No further questions. Prosecutor McCullough comes back up. He says, now, Mr. Nguyen, you're not a Proud Boy, are you? He says, yeah, I am. I'm a second degree. I belong to the Mount Baker chapter. He says, now you only recognize Zach here today in the courtroom? He says, yeah. Was he in the Ministry of Self-Defense? He says, no. Were you in the Ministry of Self-Defense? No. Did you participate in boots on the ground? No. He says, a prosecutor says, well, just by the look on your face. And Nguyen says, well, to be honest, I don't know what you're talking about, honestly. He says, I didn't go to D.C. on 1-6 and I wasn't in any of the chats. So I don't even know what you're talking about, says Nguyen. He's laughing easily. He seems genuinely surprised. I don't even know what you're talking about. Prosecutor is a little frustrated right now. He says, this is the most intense time you spent with Real was when he was in Yuma in 2009, 2012. He says, yeah. Nguyen says that we talked over the phone, we text, but we never Real visited back in Washington 2020. What did you guys talk about? Any Proud Boy stuff? He says, nope, no Proud Boy stuff. No further questions. Defense is back out. On redirect, asks Nguyen if he feels like he knows Real. He says, yeah. And that's that. Now, we change defense attorneys. Nick Smith requests a sidebar, and another witness comes. Carmen Hernandez continues. The defense is going to call Henry William McGill. Tall, thin, 40-year-old, unmarried black man without kids. He's wearing a Bills jersey. They say, hey, Henry, how are you? Where'd you come from? He says, well, how'd you meet Zach? He says, I met Zach back in Yuma, Arizona, back in service at the time at the Marine Corps. And how long did you serve in the Marines? He says, almost 5 years. And then I signed a re-enlistment. I was deployed to Japan for 2 years. Didn't see combat. McGill did basic he says, I did basic training, flight equipment training, Pensacola, #1 in his class. He chose where to be deployed. He chose Japan. He always dreamt about the place and wanted to see it. Maybe the cherry blossoms? He says, yeah, that's a big part of it. So you served in Japan for 2 years and then you came back? He says, yeah. I returned to Cherry Point, North Carolina. And what happened after that? Well, a piece of the unit had been loaned to the unit in Yuma, and that's when we met. We met when we were out partying. Remember when that was? It had to be around 2010, 2011, somewhere around that time. Did there come a time when you left the service and when you met up with Real? He says, yeah, I got accepted to Temple University right as my contract, right at the end, and I decided to take that opportunity. Now, you said at the end of your service, you served 2 tours in the Marines. But were you less than honorably discharged? He said, yeah, unceremoniously. When I came back from Japan, North Carolina, more specifically, yeah, it was a situation here. I left to go to Philly. I had a friend there, so So the reason for your less than honorable discharge is because you smoked marijuana? Wow. He says, yes, I had to. I thought it was the best decision. That's the real racism. He says, when I came back upon Real at Temple University, it was total happenstance. Carmen says, do you have any musical talent? He says, yeah, I do. Since the 5th grade. What kind of music? He says, lyrical poetry. Others might say hip hop. How long at Temple were you in contact with Real? The whole time. We would stay in touch, phone, text message all the time. I performed at a bar in Pennsylvania, one that Zachary Real co-owns called Bada Bing. They had a menu, they had drinks. They said that he was a promoter there for 3 to 4 months and then left for Philly. He says, well, what do you think about Zach Real? Carmen asks. I have a very high opinion of his integrity, a very high opinion of his truthfulness. Everything he said he would do, he did it. He never went back on his word. He always followed through. No further questions. Prosecutor comes up, starts cross-examination. They talk about the Bills. Oh, the Bills, how are they doing? I just wanted to make sure I understand this. Now, you spent time with Zach in Yuma and then joined him back at Temple. Is that true? Yeah. You stayed in touch by phone, right? Yeah. Now, in reviewing the phone records that we looked at, you didn't talk to him too much in November, December 2020, did you? We talked a little bit. But you didn't talk much, right? He says, yeah, that's correct. Was McGill part of the Proud Boys in 2020? Were you part of the Proud Boys? He says, no, I've never been part of the Proud Boys. Not part of any chats? No. Did you know anything that Real said in any of the chats? You didn't know anything about the chats, right? Right. You were not in DC on 1/6, right? Right. You don't know anything that Zach Real did on 1/6, right? Right. And you weren't with him on the march to the Capitol, were you either? Right. You don't know anything he said or did that day. He says, well, I do know that he led a group prayer of some sort. That's the only thing. Mr. Real led a group prayer, he asks. Yeah, I saw a video of it. And you've not been in this courtroom since January of this year, right? Yeah. And you haven't seen any of the evidence. Objection, sidebar. You have not been here since January 6th. You've not heard evidence coming into this case, right? Right. Hernandez comes back up for a redirect. She says, have you had any contacts with Real until today? Yeah. And you attended Black Lives Matter events? No. Your contact with Real was regarding the military, right? Bar, Temple, conversations, and all of that stuff, right? Yeah. No further questions. Now, Judge Kelly breaks for a brief sidebar. We're nearing the morning break hour. We're moving so fast today, Real's witnesses managed to escape a lengthy examination. Judge Kelly tells the jury that they're going to tell them about a stipulation, which is an agreement between the parties. Here is a stipulation. It's about Biggs, who's a defendant, about his biographical details. So the defense attorneys and the prosecutors got together and they said, here's what we can agree upon. These are facts. 1, Biggs enlisted in the U.S. Army, November 9, 2004. Upon completing basic, joined the 82nd Airborne. While there, deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, 2 years, 2 months. This is Pattis reading this. He says, ladies and gentlemen, during Biggs' service in Afghanistan, he received a Purple Heart and he was discharged in 2012 due to non-combat related injuries. Was a staff sergeant. He became an online journalist after discharge. After the 2016 election, he began to work as an online personality for InfoWars. His deployment ended in 2017. In 2018, Biggs moved from Austin to Florida. He has a 5-year-old daughter. Next, he brings it up for his next client. Kelly says, you'll have copies of these, ladies and gentlemen, when this moves forward. Now, Pattis has another stipulation, so that's some facts about Biggs. Pattis continues. He says, now we also agree, this is interesting, the government and the defendant Biggs agree and stipulate that confidential human sources, in quotes, informants, are used by the FBI to gather information that the FBI uses to investigate crimes and to monitor potential threats of domestic or national security concerns. They use CHSs governed by guidelines by the Attorney General of the United States. Any individual who provides useful, credible info to the FBI for authorized collection activity, it goes on, but it's too fast on the screen. She can't capture it all. And we'll see if we can get the documents. But it's about confidential human sources. And this is what's going to be landing in front of the jury. It's like a document. It is a document with notes in there. These are facts that you can consider in this case. We'll see if we can dig up that document. It also stipulates that between or on November 3rd and January 6th, look at this, the FBI maintained at least 8 confidential human sources, including Aaron, who provided reporting on or about the Proud Boys. One more time. A stipulation between the prosecutors and the defense says between November 3rd and January 6th, at least 8 confidential human sources were maintained by the FBI, all providing reporting on or about the Proud Boys. There are only 5 Proud Boys who are being charged with crimes in this case. There were 8 confidential human sources. At least. Kelly says to the jury, stipulations are facts the parties agree to. You should consider any stipulation of fact to be undisputed evidence. Undisputed evidence that there were 8 sources, informants. We don't know how many other feds were involved. Paid feds agents were also involved. We don't know. And Kelly says, undisputed. Prosecutors agree. 8 sources for 5 defendants. With that said, break for 10 minutes. Jury leaves. It's going to be a very long video they're going to play. Can't hear the video. The video the jurors are watching today is 90 minutes. It's Jeriguai playing a clip from the Proud Boys teleconference. And she's uploading the clips to YouTube if you want to watch this. It's a 90-minute conversation. She's got all the clips. Make sure you're following Brandy Buckman if you want to go watch the rest of it. Says this should end the evidence after this video. There's still other witnesses who want to be called. Now, attorney for Dominic said that today their team has a witness ready, and if there's time, they'll bring that back up. Jurors are paying close attention. Tario's leaning forward in the chair. A joke is shared amongst the Proud Boys that elicits a smile. They're using the R word. Video continues. Jurors hear Tario and the Proud Boys laughing. They're talking about a 6-pointed star, 1.6, and elders, laughing and crosstalk. They're yucking it up and talking about those MAGA hoes out there. Shout out to all the MAGA hoes. As they talk about the coming event on 1/6, this is a pre-1/6 video, and the need to keep women and MAGA out of the ranks that day. One Proud Boy recalls how a woman told him to make a hole so she could get past the line. So the defense is being shown. The video ends in court. Now the jury is excused for lunch. Judge says, I suspect we moved through a bunch of witnesses quicker than the parties thought. Let me see what the schedule looks like. What's your preference? Here we go. What is your preference as far as addressing the sealed matter for the next witness? Prosecutor says, we do think it makes sense to make use of the jury's time. We're prepared to move forward with Mr. Riley. But if something comes up, we'd like a chance to address it. They're back after lunch. Next witness is up. This is Patrick Riley. And this attorney is Roger Roots, who brings up witness Patrick Riley. Patrick, where do you live? He says, I currently live in Boston, work in advertising, shoot TV commercials. He has a shaved head, bald, neatly trimmed goatee, wears a dark suit, white collared shirt. He says, I like to do photography at political events. Do you recognize these people here? He says, yeah, I recognize Tario, different events. Went to one in 2019, same for Biggs and Nordine. I recognize him. I never met or even spoke to Pizzola. Not a close friend with Biggs. Don't think that he'd invite him to the wedding, but we've shared Airbnbs and got a nasty snoring habit. Are you a Proud Boy? No, not a Proud Boy. Never been a Proud Boy. Did you come through DC on 1/6 taking photographs? He says, yeah, I did. I got in around 8, started taking photos around 9. I took photos, went back to Boston in the early afternoon. Says, I started taking photos around the ellipse and went through the crowd until I saw the Proud Boys congregating near the Washington Monument. Followed them as they marched along. Well, I want to pull up one of the photos you took. Riley says it was right after the march started. He got a few yards ahead, turned around, black and white photo shows the Proud Boys marching towards the Capitol. Do you share the politics of these guys? He says, no, absolutely not. I don't share their politics. How long did you march with them? I don't know, maybe 20, 25 minutes. Were you the only person taking photos? No, there were a lot of media taking photos. Where were you now in this photo? We were at the food trucks. He says, it wasn't that far away from the Capitol. Do you happen to see people with radios there? He says, well, you can see Joe has a radio on. Did you see them use the radio? He says, I saw them get frustrated, like the radio wasn't working or something, but I didn't see them speak to anyone on it. If they got them working at some point, I didn't see that. Oh, so the Proud Boys, their radios weren't even working. Remember that? They said they had radios to insurrect the country. They couldn't even get them to work. He says, at the food truck, he says, it was almost like the event was over. It was quiet, kind of sad. I was going to take the train home. I was kind of sad that it was ending. I thought it was going to be a raucous event, and then it petered out. He said, did you guys notice Antifa there? Somebody asked him if there was a bus full of Antifa. Riley said, I think that's ridiculous. It was just wishful thinking. It seemed like a boogeyman was there. There was nobody to fight with. It was just kind of lame. So what happened next? Well, I got on a bus and went over to Boston. And there I started getting text messages asking if I was okay. No further questions. Prosecutor comes back up, asks Riley, the photographer. So you were with a group at the monument until they ended the food trucks. Is that true? Yeah. And at some point at food trucks, you left to get your train. It was booked already? Yeah. So you're at the food trucks and you march with them. But you weren't there when Nordine rounded up people to go to the peace circle, were you? He says no. And you didn't have any idea where they were going after you left, right? Right. No further questions. Witness is done. Very short. So Judge Kelly asks for a sidebar. Brandy Buckman continues, at Brandy Buckman on Twitter, says, the husher is now off. And Judge Kelly says, all right, everybody, I've got a couple things to discuss with the lawyers outside of your presence, but you're not dismissed for the day. All right, but I am going to excuse you for a little bit more time here. So the jurors exit, and Kelly tells the clerk, all right, we're going to proceed in a sealed session now. 10-minute recess, and then we'll be sealed. Kelly didn't dismiss the jury, and they're still sealed. Trump got indicted. We covered that. Brandy's still there. Courtroom is still sealed. Time goes by. Still sealed. It's 4:30, and it's 5:15, and then she has to leave, and the jury might still be there. Now, a court representative is cutting feed to the media room. They're still sealed. And that's it for the day. Now, as we saw, thank you to Brandy for getting us through day 50.